Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of today's show. We have with us today psychologist Josh Gressel. Welcome to the program, Josh.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super. Well, listen, let's just get started with learning a little bit about yourself and your practice. How long have you been in practice, and what got you started in this field?
Oh, I've been in practice since 1987. I decided I needed to get back to graduate school. When I was 22 years old and finished my bachelor's, I made one of those famous young person pronouncements of, I will never go to school again in my life. And by the age of 30, I realized that I needed to revisit that decision. So I was really looking at three different areas. I was either going to become an English professor, I was going to become a rabbi, or I was going to become a psychologist. And I discarded the English professor because the job market wasn't that good. I was an English major in undergraduate. I discarded the rabbi because I realized I didn't want to be a professional Jew. I just didn't like that notion of, getting paid for being Jewish. It just kind of bothered me. And I chose becoming a psychologist both because of my interest and because I just looked ahead and I thought, the human being is infinite, so I'll never get bored with my job. And it's also the kind of job where you only get better as you get older. It's not like, a professional basketball player peaks at, a certain age and you're done. As a psychologist, as long as you keep your marbles, you can just get better and better with age.
That's interesting because I was interviewing someone this week, and this same phrase came up, which applies to what you just said with getting better as you get older. Do you have 10 years experience, or do you have 1 year of experience 10 times over? And I think the caveat with what you just said is, you can get better as you get older, but you have to have that awareness, that desire to improve and always do that constant and never-ending improvement. I definitely know what you mean. But what do you find works for you to improve yourself, not only professionally, but even with some of your clients that you would tell? How would you tell them to improve themselves to know they're making constant and never-ending improvement?
That's a great question, and I like that quote, the way you described in experience, because I'm sure we all know people who have 25 years of the same, how did you say that, 1 year experience 25 times?
Yeah, do you have 10 years of experience, or do you have 1 year of experience 10 times over?
10 times, yeah. I'm sure we all know those kind of people, and we've all been exposed to them. So I think it's an important distinction to make. I think for me, when I'm working with people, is so often people are indoctrinated in a way of thinking that, you reach a particular age and that's it. You're all grown up. And it's really trying to help them unlearn that programming or that socialization. Sometimes I think it's also a lack of role models. How often do you see somebody who continues growing up until the day they die? So you really need to help people grasp that it's really possible. That's why we're given a lifetime, is to make use of it. It's not to retire at the age of 25 into the routines that we've established for ourselves, but it's really there's so much to us. We are really, truly infinite. And if you not only believe in it, but if you have that experience of how, they talk about the metaphor that's frequently used is peeling back the layers of the onion, that there's one more layer and one more layer and one more layer to go, and you never stop. So I can't imagine being bored in life. When I hear somebody say, I'm just bored, I'm shocked. How could you possibly be bored? It means you're stuck.
Well, what I wonder is, I was talking to a lady a few years ago, and we were talking about the word intimacy, and just the way she said it made me say this, and I don't know whether I had read it somewhere, but we were talking about, kind of how to phrase a workshop that she was going to be putting on. And I said, intimacy, into me, see. And it's kind of like many times you as a psychologist working with clients, you need to see into your clients and help them to see into themselves, into me see. And I think that how can you get bored? Well, the problem is they stay looking at themselves, and it becomes this selfish thing of what's in it for me, and not looking at how can I contribute to the world, or how can I break out of this rut that I'm in. And you think of some of the people, in certain economic classes that you go, wow, their grandfather was the same way, their father, they are. What makes that person break out of that realm? And many times it is someone in their life that speaks into their life positive or encouragement or motivates them. And I'm thinking of one of my favorite motivational speakers, Les Brown. His famous quote or story is when he was in school, he was I think it's called educable mentally retarded, meaning he had problems learning and he just accepted that. Well, this one teacher said, no, don't accept that. You can learn, and worked with this young kid, and gave him some little wins, and all of a sudden he started blossoming. And I think that many times that is the case. So with that thought in mind, how would you respond to someone that says, wow, life is boring and I can never break out of, or, how can I begin to learn more and improve myself? What would that catalyst be, do you think?
Well, I just, before, I guess in answering what you're just asking right now, I want to just touch on a couple of points you raised, because you raised several important ones. The first is that we are not the center of the universe. We need to be living for something greater than ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think somebody who really is just in it for my own pleasure, my own this, my own that, if that's your sole focus, you're going to be very unhappy, and you're going to end up being bored. Is that all there is? That's, I think, an important point that you're raising. The second having to do with intimacy, that I don't pretend to understand this, but we need another person to see us for us to be able to see ourselves. It's something about someone else being able to say, Mike, you really know how to interview well. You really engage well with your guests. You really help bring out the best in them. You might think that or hope that, but when someone gives you that from the outside, you're able to own it in a way and to hold on to it in a way.
Maybe because it validates.
Yeah, that intimacy that you're describing. And then I forgot the third point that I wanted to say with regard to what you were saying, but three things did come up. So I think
maybe breaking out of that rut that we're in. What is that catalyst that someone can? Because you don't need to be a psychologist to make that kind of an impact, and you don't even need to be a teacher to make an impact in a student. You can speak into encouragement into someone's life you see in your everyday work. And I think that many times you could walk by a cubicle in your office and see someone that maybe is a little down, and you just tend to go, hey, how's it going? Okay, fine. Or what if you took half a second and said, let's grab a coffee? And what if there could be that moment of encouragement or something like that? I think that it really does revolve around get your head out of your own headspace and look around and see how you can positively impact people around you, showing love, showing gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's I guess would be a fourth point that you're making, is really to take the time to validate others or to pay attention to others. The third point, which did just come to me, is really expectations. To have higher expectations. I consider it a sign of respect for another person to expect a lot of them, that you are capable. I just saw a wonderful one. I was at my local, my professional conference in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and the keynote speaker, which he was just wonderful in saying, I forget the terminology he used, but it was having to do, working with couples, and he said you have to expect that couples are capable of emotional maturity. Because oftentimes when we're working with couples, we just see all kinds of behavior where you think, well, they're just, He said, and to prove his point, he showed a homeless couple from the streets of Los Angeles that he interviewed each of them. And this woman was a bag lady who was just collecting all kinds of stuff. And the guy who, I don't know, he wasn't her husband certainly, but they'd been together on the streets for 14 years. And he just described her in these loving terms. yeah, I know she's got her quirks, but, this is what's important to her. She likes these things, so she holds on to them. And then she was describing him and saying, well, you know how smart he is, and he almost finished this college. And in other words, this couple that we would consider, that we would easily dismiss as just these homeless people, were capable of a relational maturity. So if they are, then certainly all of us are. And his point was, we need to expect of everybody a certain level of competency.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. And it reminds me of that old book by Shad Helmstetter, What You Say When You Talk to Yourself. And I think too many times we tell ourselves negative things. Oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'm always... And I think if we could start just even raising our internal dialogue, our thinking of, how can I improve that, and what would be the way that I could? And I think it opens up, because it's kind of like if I were trying to sell you a pen, and I said, do you want to buy a pen? And you could say yes or no. But what if I said, hey, I'm selling these pens. Which would you prefer, the red one or the black one? And then your mind starts looking at the choices, and you still might not buy it, but you go, I always do like red, but I can't buy it right this minute. But at least you got further than no. And it's kind of like asking those open-ended questions. Don't ask the yes or no. Well, maybe we should not be asking ourselves the yes or no questions internally. Maybe we should be going, how can I figure this thing out? And I'm sure that you've got 10,000 examples of that from just patients and case studies. But I've mentioned a couple of times, kind of like my motivational speakers or things. But when you got started out, did you have mentors or inspirations that you kind of look to in your field?
Yeah, and they've typically been the people who aren't very famous. There's been a few people who have just been major teachers in my life, and they were people who not only had a skill level of working with people, but they really thought outside the box, and they used modalities that are outside the box, and they just showed me what's possible that you don't read about in books. Yeah. So those have been my major teachers.
I like that as well. I tend to love those old books from the 20s or 30s, because sometimes the ones from today are just, polished up versions of what has always been talked about. And sometimes it's those ones from way back in the day that were so just, gritty and granular. So I agree. Mm-hmm. So you've written a book about envy. At what point in your practice or your life did you come up with the idea of envy? Because that's not a very glitzy topic.
Well, there was a couple of things coming together, converging, that created that book. The first was decades of my own envy. Anytime I would hear about somebody writing a book, giving a talk on a book, or anything having to do with publishing a book, whatever, I would just become very, very envious. And I consistently would push that feeling away. It was very uncomfortable. I was ashamed of it. I didn't want to admit it to anyone else, to myself. And at some level, I knew that my being envious of people who were writing books was really pointing at the fact that I too wanted to write one. That's what was going on there. So I started to do a little bit of reading about, envy as an emotion. And I found, first of all, there isn't a whole lot out there about it. And that what is out there is either very academic in a way that, unless you're really into research and statistical analysis, it's not very helpful, at least for me. Or it was in a moralistic in a superficial way, like envy is a sin, don't feel it. Yeah. So I thought, well, it's a good topic because it's one I know from inside. Why not kill two birds with one stone, get a book written, and also work through this emotion that I don't really know how to handle on my own. So that was the genesis of the book.
Yeah, you become your own best and first patient.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So what did you find that you were, or other patients were typically ashamed to admit envy? Why is it something that is a negative thing.
Well, Mike, if I say to you, I'm envious of you, I'm envious of you living in Colorado, or I'm envious of you having this talk radio station, or just think of something, I'm envious of you. For me to say that is to admit that I feel less than you in some way. Mm-hmm. You have something that I don't. You're more than I am in some way. And most of us just aren't comfortable doing that in any significant way. Now, we might do it in some kind of superficial way, like I envy you, your ability to, I don't know, just something that it's more about emulation. It's more, I want to be like you. But to really say I'm envious of your success is to say I feel unsuccessful. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like to admit that.
I agree with that, and it made me think of positioning with even your words. And I've heard this for years, and I've talked to people about this. The use of the word and the use of the word but. So if I said to you, hey, Josh, you mentioned that, and I really agree with it, but, I really think all of a sudden you hear the word but as a big old roadblock, and your mind goes, oh, wait a minute. But what if I said, hey, Josh, I heard what you said there, I really agree with you, and, it made me think. Now you're like, oh, he's coming alongside me. He's agreeing, and he's got something to add. So with respect to envy, there it could be, hey, Mike, you mentioned you live in Colorado, and I really have visited there. I really like the fact, and potentially it's just our wording and how we approach things. Not that you need to use specific words to combat envy, but I think in our own mind we need to go, you know what? I'm blessed. I've got a lot of beneficial things that God has given me, and I can recognize and acknowledge that other people have things as well. And I think that approach could really help out when someone recognizes that they have envy in their life. Do you find that it's a lot of it is just like the mental approach in helping people deal with that?
I would say yes, I do. And see, I'm a quick study.
Yay, you're a quick study.
And we need to have some tools in our toolbox to work with those times when, even though we're aware what we have, God has given us a lot, and we're still envious of this or that. Yeah. And the tools I try to provide in this book is to essentially show that envy is not a sign there's something wrong with you. Envy is a sign there's something right with you that you are not claiming.
Neat.
So
that would be like the positive side of envy. It's not all bad. The positive side is
exactly. Not only is it not all bad, it's actually good.
Yeah.
It's good. Envy it's got bad press, because there's what's called the 7 deadly sins. There's lust and gluttony and sloth, and all of those sins have got some positive quality. Mm-hmm. Gluttony, at least you get to eat. Sloth, at least you get to sleep. But envy, there's really no visible redeeming factor to it. And that's what I'm on like on a one-person mission to redeem envy from the dustbin of our moral history, is to say envy is actually all good if you can just be compassionate with yourself. Don't start to beat yourself up when you feel envy. And secondly, be curious. What is your envy trying to teach you? Now, sometimes, like in the case of my example of myself with a book, I was envious of people who had written books. Therefore, I needed to write a book. That's a nice, straightforward example. But I want to tell another story about, I'll just call this person Bob from Southern California. And Bob noticed that he was envious of famous people. And he read my book and he said, listen, I don't get this. I don't want to be famous. I really don't want to be famous. So I don't understand your point. I don't understand what you're talking about because I don't want to be famous. So I said, okay, fine. Just be curious. Stay open to it. Trust that the fact that you're envious of famous people, even though you don't want to be famous yourself, just stay open and let's see what unfolds. So he did, and when he came to, he was very perplexed, by the way, because he told me, he said, I'm standing in a supermarket checkout line. I'm looking at these tabloids. I see Britney Spears, in her latest escapade, and I'm envious of her. And I don't want to be Britney Spears. I don't want to be a pop star. I don't understand this at all. I mean, it was really driving him nuts. What he finally came to realize, however, was that he needed to become more visible in his life. And his envy of famous people was alerting him to the ways in which he was shrinking himself, holding himself back in ways he didn't need to. So it wasn't that he wanted to become famous, but it was that he needed to become more visible. And that's just the form it took. That's the way he got alerted, was through it. I mean, it's kind of a shorthand, famous people, for becoming visible. So his envy latched onto something.
What line of work was that person in?
He is actually, it's an interesting question. He is an acupuncturist, and he's got a very special way of doing the acupuncture. And he really had, like some of us sometimes do, just the sense, I'll just be myself and the world will beat a path to my door. He didn't want to promote. Well, lo and behold, most of us know if you want to be noticed, you have to stand up. And so he was thinking he could just sit on the sidelines and somehow he was going to get discovered. And
hang the shingle out. And
he needed to start to actively speak what he had to offer. And, what he also came to understand, I mean, in not speaking up and not being more visible, not only was he cheating himself, but he was cheating the people who needed what he had to offer that otherwise wouldn't know about it.
And he may have had something truly significantly unique, but he could have just been a good, plain old, down-to-earth acupuncturist that treats his patients super well and has his own original, fresh approach to it. Maybe nothing like earth-shattering, like he's being published and people are flying all over the world. But the reason I asked that question is I find that as well, working with my clients, is sometimes you don't want to be the Britney Spears on the tabloids, but sometimes you have that desire to be the big fish in your little pond. And your example of the acupuncturist, he might not even need to be the big fish in the state he's in. It might just be the town he's in. So how can you make contributions that way with respect? So let's use that envy. And, well, could you go speak at your local? Yeah, I could do that. Could you go to your local association? Could you sponsor a whatever? And I think that in those small ways, that can have like a dotted line connection to the big tabloid. In his world, he could be the Britney Spears on the tabloid by being featured in his local Chamber of Commerce, mixer the following month where he's speaking briefly on his, findings. And I think that right there could be a strong realization for people like that. Would you suspect that would be the case?
Absolutely. And I would say even more, because it's not just on the external that is working. Yes, people are starting to hear about him, people are starting to come to him, but that through doing those things, he's going to uncover layer upon layer of who he is. He's going to get comfortable showing up more fully. I mean, just, again, to use myself as an example, so I wrote this book, and I had some kind of illusion, I guess, that I could just put it out there and people were going to buy it. But no, you have to promote it. So here I am. I get to talk to you today. I find that I didn't know this ahead of time. I really enjoy having these radio or podcast interviews. They're fun. So you just get to discover all kinds of new territory, internal territory, by doing this, by following the dotted line, as you say, of your envy.
Well, and another thing that I would say we're using the book as an example, yourself and this acupuncturist, your book, you might make $72 in royalties from your book being published, right? That, in my opinion, that's not the point. The point is, if you wanted to be that big fish in your little pond, and this acupuncturist the same exact way, he could write a book and make $72 in royalties. That's not going to pay, even for a dinner for two these days. But guess what it does? It elevates those people, yourself and him, onto a platform where people in his small sphere of influence, his strategic alliances, his patients, his prospects, his local, chambers and people like that, like, oh, you're a published, oh, hey, come speak to us. And I would submit to you that it would open doors and it would predispose prospective patients of his and yours to go, you know what, I was referred to Tom Smith, and Tom Smith has a nice-looking website, but Tom Smith doesn't write and be recognized here, so let me go and talk to these people because there's that little air of exclusivity. So the intangible is the non-royalties. Who cares about whether you make money selling your book? It's the fact that it opens up some doors to allow you to make an impact in people's lives, acupuncture or, psychologist, and I think that plays then into seeing then the results that you're doing for people. When people say, wow, you really made me realize this, or hey, you helped me with this condition, and then you realize that, you know what, I was taught that this was a good technique, and doggone if that patient told me that I made an impact, and then it solidifies in you what you're doing for them, and then that gives you a little bit more confidence to go out and do it again.
Yeah, I really like the way you're broadening the definitions of how this all works, and the definition also of what is success. And that fits well with my book because envy isn't really about the thing itself. It's about what it means to you. So, the example of him being envious of famous people, it's not about the famous people. It's not about him wanting to be famous. It's about the meaning is that he needed to show up more fully. Mm-hmm. And that showing up more fully isn't only so that he can get more patients. It's because you use the word God, so I'll feel comfortable to do it. That's who God needs him to be, is to be to show up more fully in life. Because he's got, for whatever reason, because he's got something to offer, because the people need, who knows? I mean, it just goes out in so many directions and down in so many different levels. And so I think we tend to get more envious when we focus on this specific concrete thing, how successful
and that
are you
concrete
by this
thing
measure?
Could be a pebble compared to the boulder of Britney Spears on the tabloid, but his pebble could just be that one little event, or your pebble could be that one little input that you're able to throw out there into the ocean of the world. But the fact that you did it yourself, that is a sense of accomplishment and achievement, and then that satiates that desire, that envious desire that you had, and you're like, I never wanted to be on a tabloid cover, but guess what? Doggone if I didn't speak to my local whatever, and I got some high fives afterwards, and it might lead to more things, but even if it doesn't, I was able to contribute into this group and answer some great questions. Wow, I feel validated and fulfilled. And it doesn't need to be huge, major stages of the world. It could just be your small stage in your small town, but there are those tools and tactics. So I think we could probably continue talking for about 4.5 more hours and still be on chapter 1 of your book. So I would just encourage people, check out this book and what Josh can offer. So if you can just wrap us up here with what's the best way people can learn more about your book and how they can purchase that.
Yeah, very good. First, let me give the name of the book. I don't think we've done that yet. It's called Embracing Envy. And if you just remember that's enough, Embracing Envy. But the subtitle is Finding the Spiritual Treasure in Our Most Shameful Emotion. And it's available on all of the major online booksellers, like Amazon or Barnes & Nobles. That's the easiest way, is just go online and put in Embracing Envy, and you'll find it.
Okay. That sounds good. And then your website, what is that address?
It's my name, Josh Gressel, JoshGres, as in Sam, SEL, 2 S's.com.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, learning more about the crazy concept of how to embrace envy in a positive approach. So I know I learned a lot, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, Mike.
Certainly.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.